into this.
Just wondered.
So let me read this and then get your thoughts. Can you explain in broad terms what all this represents in terms text types and the transmission of the New Testament? And can you also explain what the coherence-based genealogical method is? I know you're going to love this. No, I'm
not going to explain that. I'm telling you.
Well, I'm going to try. I'm just trying. And how it's changing the way textual critics conceive of text types and the role they play in reconstructed text. And by the way, you're going to hate me. Ready? Try to do it in less than 5 minutes.
Okay. So I want you to explain quantum physics in 5 minutes or less, please, and make it simple so everybody can understand. Okay, don't use any complicated language here.
I know, right?
Okay. So is everybody seeing this chart?
I think so.
So B.H. Streeter was early 20th century, a major scholar of the Gospels, Brit. He is building on the theory developed most convincingly by Westcott and Hort, who were two Cambridge scholars in the 1880s, who published their work in the 1880s. The logic of this chart is that you have different forms of the New Testament in circulation in different parts of the Christian world in the early centuries. By different forms of the New Testament, I mean that scribes are copying the New Testament in Alexandria, Egypt, in North Africa, in the city of Caesarea. They're, different scribes in different places are copying the text. And in every place, scribes are making mistakes, and they're sometimes changing things on purpose. The changes made in one place tend to stay in that place because that's where the other their successor scribes are copying them. And so a certain form of the text that's worded in a certain way. So you take John chapter 1, there'll be differences in the way it's worded in Alexandria and in Caesarea and in Antioch in Italy, depending on the changes that scribes have made and then reproduced in that locale. The argument of Streeter is that you can isolate these various local texts, and that over time, as Christianity grew and spread, the textual traditions of one place came to affect the textual traditions of other places, until by the end of the 4th century, you end up with a text that is kind of an amalgamated text of these various locations that is not particularly close to what the original looked like, because it's an amalgamation of local texts in various places that have all been smashed together into one text that there is being seen as improved, but in fact has all sorts of changes in it because of where it came from. That's called the Byzantine text. That became the text of the Greek New Testament throughout the Middle Ages, and it is the form of the text that then was used as the basis for the King James translation. So that the King James translation is based on a form of the text that is a late and inferior form of the text. To find out what the text looked like in the earlier centuries before the Byzantine text, you have to isolate the Alexandrian text and the Caesarean text and so forth and so on.
So a quick question on that is, do we have, or I might be wrong about this, we don't have Jerome's Vulgate, do we? I think only later copies that are corrupt, correct?
We don't have the original thing that Jerome did. And Jerome actually didn't do the entire the Vulgate. He did the Gospels. And so we don't have the originals of the Greek New Testament, or the originals of the Vulgate, or the originals of versions done in Syriac or Coptic or Armenian, or none of these languages. So what we have in all of them are copies that have been made that have been changed either by mistake, by accident, or on purpose. And the trick of textual criticism is to figure out, among all these manuscripts, which reading of this verse is the one that was originally written. John 1:18. What did it originally say when the author wrote it? And how was it changed, and why was it changed? That's what textual critics do. And Streeter was an old style textual critic, was very good at what he did.
He's not genealogical based.
He is genealogically based, but he's not the coherence-based genealogical method. No, he's genealogical. The whole thing is a genealogy because you're drawing a family tree.
Okay, got it.
So you're drawing a genealogy, and so that exactly is what he's doing. But that's not what the genealogical based coherence. I mean, yeah.
I would hope that maybe we can have another time to do this, of course, to delve into getting your thoughts on this theory, of course. And I know
the coherence-based, no, I'm telling you, the coherence-based genealogical method is not something you're going to be able to explain in 5 minutes.
I know. Yeah, maybe one day. That's what I'm saying.
Nobody's going to care. It's not going to make any sense. I mean, I'm just telling you. Yeah. There are very few textual critics who can actually understand it.
Well, modern evangelicals like to use the catchphrase embarrassment of riches to describe the vast quantity of copies of the New Testament we have, but most Christians throughout history didn't have an embarrassment of riches, right? Why do you think it's important to modern Christians to believe that scholars have finally restored the so-called original text, considering most Christians throughout history had Bibles full of errors? And how close do you think we are currently to the original text?
These are really good questions, and they're again very difficult.
It only gets worse from here.
I don't know of any bona fide scholars who think we have in every detail the original text. Even, I've debated Dan Wallace a number of times, and he has a more optimistic view of things than I do, but he agrees there are passages where we don't know, or where, I can change it. There are passages where we wholeheartedly disagree. I don't mean me and Dan. I mean everybody in the field disagrees. Is it worded this way or that way? This way or that way? There are tons of verses like that. Dan would agree with that. So we don't know. The question is, how close are we? And the embarrassment of riches is all about the fact that there are more manuscripts of the New Testament than for any other book from the ancient world, flat out. And people raise this with me as just like I didn't know this. Yeah, this is right. It's completely common knowledge. It's true, and it's not an accident. It's true. It's not a miracle. It's true. Who's copying books throughout most of Western history? Monks and monasteries until about the 16th century. That was it. And so what books are they going to copy? Are they more likely to copy Paul's letters or Plato's dialogue? What do you think? Paul was scripture for them, so of course they copied Paul's letters more. And so yes, of course we have more. That is true. It's also true that as a result of that, we have far more textual differences in the New Testament than for any other book from the ancient world. So many that scholars have not been able to count them all. Right. The latest estimates say that there are up to 500,000 differences in our manuscripts, 500,000 differences. Now, what people get upset with me is when I say that, but then I go on to say, which is also absolutely true, the vast majority of these don't matter for squat. They don't. Like scribes can't spell. Every time you misspell a word, it's a difference. Okay, well, who cares? I don't really care much, but I mean, so that's absolutely true. But there are some big differences,
and that's what I want to. Yeah. Our time is so limited. I'd love to just squeeze more out of you. This is amazing.
In regards to the manuscripts from the early church fathers, like the 2nd century and so on, they could put together 99% of the entire New Testament. We're talking about quotations from the New Testament by the early church. In this movie is the best explanation of what they're talking about.
Father Marquez, Lee Strobel, thank you for seeing me.
Of course.
I should tell you I'm a bit of a history buff myself, so yeah, I'm particularly intrigued with your archaeological work.
Former life.
Former life, yes. I'm a bit surprised, given your stellar reputation, that you just gave all that up for this.
Would you like to be more specific?
Well, it just seems to me that for the better part of 2,000 years, Christianity has been creating these rituals and these rules. They've erected these elaborate and often expensive cathedrals, and all of that to support a faith that I believe is ultimately built on sand.
And yet, it's all still standing.
Yes, because people keep telling each other the same stories over and over again. Just because I write something down and I bury it in the dirt, it doesn't make it true.
I think I'm beginning to see the crux of your visit.
Look, I understand that a number of people claim to have seen Jesus after his crucifixion, and some of them even wrote it down. But I guess my question is, how can we be sure of the reliability of those manuscripts?
The same way we authenticate any historical document, by comparing and contrasting the copies that have been recovered. It's called textual criticism. The more copies we have, the better that we can cross-reference and figure out if what the original was saying is historically accurate. And the earlier they come from in history, the better. Take Homer's Iliad, for example.
Is this real?
That's as real as the Macedonian dirt that I dug it up from.
Well, the Greeks considered this their Bible for many centuries.
Yes, they did. That is one of 1,565 copies in existence today. Now, the Iliad was originally composed 800 years before Christ. Okay. This Greek copy is dated at the 3rd century AD.
So, 800 and 3rd century. So that's 1,100 years between this copy and the original, yes?
Correct. There is only one ancient collection of writings that has more authenticated copies than the Iliad. Can you guess what that is?
You're going to tell me the Bible.
The New Testament.
And how many copies is that?
To date, archaeologists have recovered 5,843 Greek New Testament manuscripts. That's 4 times as many as the Iliad.
Really?
The earliest fragment of the Gospel of John was found in ancient Egypt, and it dates to 2nd century AD.
How close is that to the original?
Less than 30 years. I have one of the fragments in my collection. It's quite a treasure, isn't it? After the New Testament and the Iliad, the runners-up don't even come close. We only have 100 copies of Sophocles, 7 copies of Plato's tetralogies, and only 5 copies of anything by Aristotle. In fact, if you laid the surviving copies of Aristotle one on top of the other, they would make barely 4 feet. You do the same with surviving copies of the New Testament, the stack would be a mile high. Nothing else in history even comes close. How is that for reliable?
Just from the writings of the early church fathers, like quotations of New Testament verses, they could piece together 99% of the New Testament, with the exception of 11 verses, talking about manuscripts from the 2nd century AD. And that's quotations by the early church fathers from the 2nd century and so on. That's not Bible text, like an actual book of the Bible.
Excuse me. Legal Affairs Desk. Speaking.
Yeah, this is Bill Craig.
I'm sorry, who?
Bill Craig.
Dr. Craig, thank you for returning my call. I appreciate that.
Yeah, I'm sorry for the delay. I'm calling from Jerusalem. I have to give a lecture any minute. I didn't want to keep you waiting.
I'll cut right to the chase.
So I've been doing research into the purported resurrection of Jesus, and I want to run a theory by you. Maybe the reason
That the tomb was empty was because Jesus' body was never there in the first place.
because we know that the Romans used to throw the bodies of crucifixion subjects to the dogs, right?
Well, there's no evidence for that, but there are specific records that didn't happen to Jesus.
And what records are those?
Well, actually, the earliest recorded accounts tell us that Jesus was properly buried in a tomb, and the Romans did allow for burial of some crucifixion victims.
But then there's something that still doesn't add up
To me about all of these supposed eyewitnesses.
that claim to have found Jesus' empty tomb.
What, the fact that they were all women?
Yeah, because we know that according to Jewish customs, women were deemed to be unreliable witnesses. Am I right?
Well, true. So why did all 4 gospel writers record that it was women who discovered the empty tomb?
I'm asking you that.
Well, if you were a 1st century Jew making up this story out of thin air, then you would never say that women discovered the tomb. It would damage your case, not help it.
Okay, so maybe we're dealing with the world's most inept disciple.
Or maybe the disciples reported what actually happened and let the chips fall where they may.
Okay, all right, but you have to admit here that there is a gaping hole.
Hole in all of
A
this.
gaping hole.
The fact that the Gospels are filled with contradictions about the empty tomb, okay? If I turned in a story that was this jumbled, I'd be out of a job. If we look through the Gospels, you start at Matthew, okay? Matthew puts Mary Magdalene and some other Mary at the tomb. You flip over to Mark, he adds Salome. You go to Luke, he adds Mary, mother of James, and then some lady named Joanna. What is that? You need a Sherpa guide to sort your way through this mess.
Sure, there are differences, but that doesn't trouble most historians.
Why? Why doesn't that trouble? It troubles me. It should trouble them.
Because the core of the story is the same in all 4. After Jesus is placed in the tomb, it's visited on Sunday morning by a small group of women, and they find the body is gone.
Now, you've studied law.
Yale law, yes.
And then you know that when policemen question several witnesses at a crime scene, they never expect the secondary details to be consistent as long as the core account is the same. In fact, if they're too similar, it's suspect.
That's true.
Well, that's exactly what we're talking about here.
The empty tomb is based on evidence, and isn't evidence your trade?
It is. Yes, but what if
The resurrection is one of the historical details that was recorded incorrectly.
how can we know? How can we ever know?
Lee, let me ask you something. Do you really want to know the truth, or is your mind already made up, regardless of the facts?
Oh, look, Doc.
I'm a journalist, okay? It's my job to challenge assumptions until they're proven otherwise. That's all I'm doing.
No, I get that. But when is enough evidence enough evidence?